Hello, and welcome to our webinar about the new one2edit dynamic layout engine, also known as the DLE. So everyone is in listen only, so everyone is muted, but you can still submit questions via the questions panel in the GoToWebinar interface. Furthermore, there are two downloads available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar interface. There's a PDF copy of the slides and a marketing handout. So let us continue with the webinar. The DLE assists in the resizing of collateral by doing much of the spade work automatically, thus reducing costs, increasing efficiency, and ensuring design conformity. We'll go into more detail about what this means exactly over the course of the webinar. When creating a document for print or as a web banner, you may need to resize the document multiple times and adapt the content for each and every required size. Currently, such a process involves a lot of manual labor. It also requires professional InDesign skills to ensure that the document is properly set up for prepress and that the design is intact. Moreover, the complexity of corporate design can mean that the approval process takes even longer than the resizing process. Even a small change to the size of a document, for example, resizing A4 to US letter, will mean manually adapting the content on each and every spread. And yes, the DLE does work with multi-page documents. So in this example here, if I do a simple resize of the brochure, the bottom gets cropped and the spread extends beyond the frame on the right, because US letter size is shorter and wider than A4. When using the DLE, however, this is automatically accounted for, leaving you with a resized document that needed no manual adjustments or large margins, but still conforms to your brand guidelines. And this is the essence of what the DLE can give you. The automated adaptation of content in a resized document that remains 100% brand design compliant and can be used by anybody, even if they are not a professional InDesign user. In other words, you can set up rules for a single document design that will allow non-designers to generate brand-compliant versions of that design for multiple formats and publications. So, as a little check to see that everyone's actually awake, I'd like to just quickly run a poll to ask about your document resizing needs. So if people could just have a click as to if you have current resizing needs. It only allowed for 5 options, so there's no other. So if there is an other, I can just click don't know or something if there's one that's not there. So there are some answers coming in, and I'll give it another couple of seconds just to let everyone. Okay, great. So we can see here that if we look at our results, there's a lot into the print advertising and online advertising / banners kind of thing. That's where most of it is. Some point of sale, some for the international paper size differences too. So it's a good spread, to be honest, and a few don't knows or possibly other. Thank you for that. So I will now continue with the presentation. So the dynamic layout engine itself uses rules to automatically adapt branding and design for a resized document. These rules are set up to define how the document elements and the spaces between those elements behave as the document is resized. So for example, if you can auto-link objects with a single click, so you select objects, You can click it, auto-link them, and then adapt those links to suit your own design guidelines. Rules can also be set for the elements themselves, and the default values for all rules can be defined up front to further simplify the setup process. Another feature ensures that your images are not incorrectly cropped. So given that a frame will resize as a document resizes, you want to be sure that nothing important gets lost. And safe boxes and vanishing points can be set up so that the subject of your image remains in focus even as the frames change size. All of your rules can, of course, be tested in the preview mode to ensure that they're behaving correctly, or at least as expected. Furthermore, the DLE is not just useful for when the document itself resizes, but it can also help to adapt to changes in content that may cause frames to change in size. So for example, if I added more body text to this document here at this point, then I've set up the frame as well to grow upwards because that's where there's space on this design. And the DLE ensures that the design adapts to this change in content without having to do any manual work. As well as this, the page size itself could increase along with the content if that was desired. In other words, with the page growing due to extra content. Both maximum and minimum sizes for frames and spaces can be set, as well as maximum and minimum sizes for the document itself and for the aspect ratio distortion values, which gives you full control over what happens to the document. Finally, documents of varying sizes can be automatically generated using the one2edit API. And this can further drive efficiency, especially in, for example, repetitive workflows or workflows that always need to have the same multitude of sizes generated each quarter or whatever. And a single source document can be set up with DLE rules and a script that runs that generates and exports the various PDFs or JPEGs or InDesign files that you might require. So enough on that. Let us go on to showing a demo of the DLE in action. So in this first, or in these two live examples, we're going to resize an A4 one-page ad for two sizes in each of two different publications, the Wirtschaftswoche and the Tagesspiegel. Both German publications because that's what I had to hand. For the Wirtschaftswoche, the A4 original will be resized to a full page and to a smaller 2/3 vertical page option. So let me just quickly jump out and go to a web browser and open one2edit. And I have a template here, a normal one, just to start a job that I've set up. And all of this is bog standard one2edit so far. The main difference is that when you log in here now, so I've already set up rules in the master, and I've got a DLE tool in the toolbar. So all of this is normal one2edit. I can click text to edit text, etc. If I click the DLE tool, I can then resize the document. So the first was 188 by 244 millimeters. And if I apply that change in size, we can see the document changes size and the design stays intact. Similarly, for the 2/3 vertical page, the height actually stays the same, and then the width changes to 124. So it'll get a lot narrower. And in this particular design, as I said, I've made it so that this is where any space will be brought into. You don't have to leave that. This is purely so that I can demonstrate things like if I do put in more, if I do put in more text here, for example, and I apply this change, and the text will then grow, and the frame will grow, and the design will move up the page, because that's how I've set the DLE up to do that. But you don't have to have, it doesn't have to always be space at the top of the page. It just depends on what you've set it up as. So you can see that we've managed to do two resizes there pretty quickly, easily. So if I go back, the Tagesspiegel, we're also going to do full page, and also a smaller 1/3 corner field option. First off, you'll notice that the full page on this particular one is larger than on the other. So if I jump back out to my web browser, and we can continue on in the same job. We don't need to create a new anything new for this. We just continue on in the same document. 370.5 by 528 millimeters. So you can see straight away it's over 70% larger in both directions than the A4, which means that we're going to have to zoom out now because it's bigger. So, but you can see again, everything's intact. And the 1/3 corner field option kind of changes the aspect ratio in the other direction and makes it not exactly square, but yeah, close-ish to square. So you can see that it all fits. Getting a bit close at the top, but again, that just happens to be this particular design. And so you can very, very easily see that if I was a non-InDesign user, so the document is there, it's been set up with the DLE, and I simply come along, I can click a button to resize, or as I mentioned, you can make a script that will simply churn out these resized documents if required. So in summary, the DLE can help in multi-format workflow by driving efficiencies, reducing costs, and helping to ensure design integrity. So thanks for the attention thus far. We'll now look to a few questions. If you haven't already, you can post questions in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar interface. Or if you think of any questions later on after the webinar, you can email us at sales@one2edit.com. And while we're waiting just for questions, just really quickly, I'm going to run another poll about if you can see the DLE being useful in your own business. Just to give us an idea about if it looks potentially like a good thing. Still a few votes popping in. And I will call it there. So overall, roughly half of you think it's potentially helpful, some potentially very helpful, some don't know, and some people aren't seeing what they needed from this. That is fine. Okay, to go to a few questions now. One question would be, what does it cost? And the cost is at $1,500 a month. It's available on both Enterprise and Express, so it would be part of your license fee for both of those. Have a look. So some other questions here. We have, what happens if you ask for a page size that is not possible with the content given? Depends on what you mean by not possible. So let me actually just quickly jump out to my web browser again. Just going to close this job here. So I'll just show you what it looks like in the preview. So if I just open, I'm just going to open my brochure that I did earlier on. So another question while we're waiting for it to show up is, can you ask the DLE to scale fonts rather than text frames? I assume that means, can it scale the text within the frame? Yes, it can. So you can see in our master document editor, we've got a DLE tool here, and I can click on, for example, here's a text frame, or if I go to another, we can see here that this was a very simple setup for doing the A4 to US letter. It was just basically keep the logo in line with this other frame here. So I just changed it so that it always stays in line with this frame, and that the aspect ratio, so I don't want my logo being cropped. But you can see that the frame sizing mode, you can turn on advanced mode, and all of the content can scale with the frame. So if you did have text in that frame, the text will scale with the frame as well. Similarly, yes. So if I just go to view preview, there's not really an impossible. It's not really an impossible size. So I mean, if you do this, technically, it's still possible for the document to be that size. You can scale all the frames down, but what you can do is you can set up in your dynamic layout engine, when you switch it on, you can set up things like the aspect ratio distortion limits or the size restrictions for that. So you'll know that this is my design, and I know that this is as small or as big as I want it to get. Another question, is this only for InDesign documents? Yes, it is. one2edit only works with InDesign Server, and that means that it's only for InDesign documents. So it's quite simple. As I mentioned here, the only real changes I made from the default were linking it and setting the aspect ratio of the logo. And we can see, like, for example, on a different spread here, if I go to the preview, the layout here. So the preview doesn't show our text, but as this, for example, this text frame here is now at 60%, I've just dragged it down a bit. That means that the text in that frame will also be at 60%, because that's what we sort of, because that's how the default reaction of the text in there. So you can see, for example, that if I move it like this, you probably can't see it on your screen, but you can see it over here. So it's 89% the height and 74% the width. So by default, the text will scale to the smaller of the two scaling values so that it will always fit in there. But you can change that if you need to tailor anything. So there's another question here about, is this particularly useful for online use? There are, so for brochures that are not printed maybe, but yeah, I mean, so all of the normal one2edit stuff, like you can edit text, you can replace images, that all still functions the same. We do have, for example, some customers using it for online banner generation. So they have banners and then they can export JPEGs of those banners. So static banners, I suppose. But they themselves were finding that it cost them a few hundred, maybe, euro to make to resize one picture. So they had the master, and then they had to resize it, and they were finding that the design cost was a few hundred euro essentially. And then this, obviously, the DLE obviously helps them a lot in those costs. Can you use the liquid layout in combination with the DLE? No. So the DLE overrides the liquid layout. Liquid layout essentially gets in the way, and the DLE can do all of what it can do and more in a lot of ways for the resizing aspect. But when you actually use the DLE, it will automatically switch off the liquid layout in the document, so that the liquid layout doesn't fight with the DLE, I suppose, is how to put it. But things such as auto-sizing frames, that you want your frame to grow in a specific direction, you can still have that set up fine, and that will, as we saw earlier on with the when I typed in more text, that frame was set to grow upwards, and the design then adapts to that growth in text, in content. What different outputs can you get? File types. It can export anything that InDesign Server can export. So it's not possible, for example, I don't think that it's possible to export things like Photoshop files from InDesign directly. But you can export you can export InDesign files, no problem. You can export PDFs, you can export JPEGs. But it is we are still beholden to what InDesign itself can export. So actually, let's have just a quick look here. For example, if I wanted to, if I did resize this spread to something like 315 by 180, let's say. Haven't tested this. Let's see what happens. Was that 315 by, oh, was that backwards? Hang on. Which is the width and which is the height? Ah, okay, we're working off that. Width of 315, 180 height. That sounds like it might go a bit weirder than it should be. Let me just have a look. Actually, what we'll just do, let's just do it at 80%, and you don't have to do it in millimeters. It can be millimeters, points, pixels, inches, whatever. It just defaults to millimeters because that's what I have as a a unit for this particular project. Oh, that didn't work. Demo effect, of course. Let's close that. And actually, let's try using the other template instead. But just to give you an idea about what will happen. To, for example, a text frame. I hope this works now, and that there hasn't been an update that has broken this particular project since. There, so you can see that it got smaller on this spread here. The text is still in there. The text itself scaled with the frame, so there's no overset text. We can see across the document. And everything is pretty much intact, as the case may be. So right. There is another question about, it's getting very technical. I do not know exactly what can be done by exporting and combining PDFs. So that's something we can take offline. We'll respond to that via email later in the week. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think we can end it there. So as I said, there's the two handouts there to download, the slides and the marketing handout. And there's also the recording of this session will be sent out automatically to you in a follow-up email that you can access if you wish. And any question we didn't get around to answering right now, we'll get back to you via email later in the week. So thank you very much for attending, and have a good rest of the week.